My name is Caleb, and I'm 34 years old. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a lake at dusk, the water going still, the light turning copper, the whole world seeming to hold its breath. My grandfather taught me to notice that quiet. He said most people talk right through the most important moments of their lives. I think about that now. Because when my family tried to take everything he left me, I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just waited for the right moment to let one document do all the talking. It started at my cousin Maya's birthday dinner. 40 people, a backyard full of string lights, the kind of evening designed to feel warm even when it isn't. I hadn't seen most of my family in almost 8 months. I'd been working abroad, a 2-year contract in civil infrastructure that had extended once already. The kind of work that keeps you busy enough to miss things back home. Small things at first, then bigger ones. My brother Darren pulled me aside before we even sat down to eat. He had this expression I recognized from childhood. Practiced. Slightly too relaxed. The face he wore when he wanted something and had already decided how to get it. He said we needed to talk about the lake house. I told him sure after dinner. He said no. Now. My grandfather passed 18 months before that birthday dinner. He was 81, sharp until nearly the end, and one of the few people in my life who said exactly what he meant without decoration. He left me the lake house. Not because I was his favorite, he would have laughed at that word. But because I was the one who spent summers there with him learning to fish, learning to fix dock planks, learning to read weather patterns over the water. He told me once, very plainly, that a place belongs to whoever understands it. The house had been in our family for 40 years. 3 bedrooms. A screened porch facing the water. A workshop in the back where he kept his tools organized with a precision that embarrassed the rest of us. His will was clear. The lake house transferred to me upon his passing. My mother received the family home. Darren received a financial settlement and personal belongings. It was documented, witnessed, filed. Or so I believed. Standing near Maya's garden fence, Darren told me the lake house situation had become complicated. He used that word specifically. Complicated. He said that while I was abroad, the property taxes had accumulated. That the place needed roof work, dock repairs, structural inspection. That someone needed to be managing it, and I clearly wasn't in a position to do that from overseas. He said, and I want you to understand how calmly he said this, that he had already taken care of the paperwork to have it transferred into a shared family trust, so that it could be properly maintained. I looked at him for a long moment. I asked him what paperwork. He said just the standard stuff. Transfer documents. Nothing to worry about. Then he said the line that has lived in my memory ever since. You don't even use it anymore, Caleb. Be sensible. I didn't argue. I asked a few quiet questions. He deflected each one with practiced ease. I nodded, said I'd look into it, and went and sat down at the birthday dinner. But something had gone cold in me. Because here's what Darren didn't know. I had been back to the lake house 7 months earlier, a brief visit during a gap between project phases. I'd checked on everything. Paid the outstanding taxes myself. Had a contractor walk the roof. Left the place in good condition. There was no deferred maintenance crisis. There was no urgency. Which meant whatever paperwork he was describing, the reason for it wasn't the one he'd given me. I flew home 2 weeks later with a specific purpose. I went to the county property records office before I went anywhere else. What I found there required me to sit down. The lake house had been transferred. The deed had been amended. And on the transfer document, where my signature should have appeared authorizing the change, there was a signature. It was meant to look like mine. It wasn't. I want to pause here because I've been asked many times since then what that moment felt like. Finding documentation of something that specific. Something that deliberate. It didn't feel like rage. Not immediately. It felt like the floor becoming very solid under my feet. Like the world clarifying into sharp edges. Like every nervous look Darren had given me over the past 2 years suddenly having an explanation. I photographed everything. Said nothing to anyone. And called an attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia and she's been in property law for over 20 years. She reviewed the documents for 3 days before she called me back. When she did, Her voice had that particular steadiness that professionals use when they're delivering information they know will land hard. She said the signature was forged. Identifiably so. Not a close imitation rushed, under-pressure work that wouldn't survive comparison to any verified sample of my handwriting. She said there were also procedural irregularities in how the transfer had been notarized. That the notary stamp appeared on a document that had never actually been witnessed in the required legal context. She said we had a strong case. Then she said something else. She said this hadn't just affected me. Under the transfer, the house had been moved into a trust that named Darren as sole trustee, meaning he had been making financial decisions about the property for months. Decisions that may have included things beyond maintenance. She told me not to reach out to Darren. Not yet. She said, let's see what else we find first. What she found took another 3 weeks. Darren had taken out a short-term loan using the lake house as collateral. Not enormous, but real. Documented. A private lender. An agreement signed in his name as trustee of a trust he had created using a document bearing my forged signature. He had borrowed against property he didn't own, using paperwork he had falsified. Patricia laid all of it out on her desk the afternoon she called me in. A neat stack. Organized the way my grandfather kept his workshop. She said we were no longer looking only at civil fraud. She said depending on how the district attorney chose to characterize the notarization piece, there were potentially criminal dimensions to consider. She asked me how I wanted to proceed. I said I wanted to give my family one opportunity first. Not out of softness, but because my grandfather valued honesty enough that I thought the story should include at least one moment where someone chose it voluntarily. My mother hosted Sunday dinner 2 weeks later. She didn't know the reason I'd asked to come. Darren was there. His wife. My aunt. We got through most of the meal before I set an envelope on the table. I slid it toward Darren and said that Patricia had asked me to make sure he saw this before anything was formally filed. He opened it slowly. His wife watched his face. Inside was a single document. A side-by-side forensic comparison of my actual signature and the signature on the transfer deed. 1 page. Clear. Annotated. And a cover letter from Patricia's office noting that this represented a fraction of the documentation they had compiled. The table went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with comfort. Darren's face didn't collapse dramatically. It just emptied. Like something behind his eyes stepped back from a window and pulled the curtain. My mother said his name. He didn't answer her. My aunt asked what was happening. I said that the lake house transfer had been done without my knowledge or consent. That the signature on the authorization document wasn't mine. That Patricia had documented the loan taken against the property as well. And that I had come here before filing because I hoped that this could be handled with some honesty left intact. No one moved for a long moment. Then Darren set the document down. Very carefully. Like it might do something if he handled it wrong. And he said nothing. Which was, in its own way, a complete answer. The months that followed were not clean or simple. They rarely are. My mother went through a period of desperate mediation, calling, messaging, trying to find a version of the story that didn't require her to confront what her other son had done. My aunt sided with Darren initially, then went quiet once Patricia's office reached out to the notary and certain things became harder to deny. The loan was called in. The lender had his own lawyers and his own interest in the outcome. Darren had to resolve that privately. The lake house was restored to my name through a corrected deed filing. Patricia handled it efficiently. The property records now reflect what my grandfather's will stated from the beginning. Darren and I have not spoken since that Sunday dinner. That's not a wound I'm keeping open. It's just the accurate description of where things stand. Last autumn, I drove out to the lake house for the first time since everything had been settled. I sat on the screened porch as the sun went down. Watched the water go still the way it always does at that hour. Copper light. The whole world holding its breath. I thought about what Darren had said at Maya's birthday. That I didn't even use it anymore. That I should be sensible. He wasn't wrong that I'd been absent. That I'd been far away and hard to reach and perhaps easy, from a certain angle, to write out of a story being rewritten without me. What he miscalculated was the paper trail. My grandfather had been meticulous. Every agreement witnessed. Every transfer documented. A man who trusted paper more than promises had left behind a property wrapped in enough legal clarity that unraveling it required forgery, and forgery, by its nature, leaves traces for people who know where to look. I think about the kind of patience it takes to do what Darren did. To plan over months. To find a notary willing to look the other way. To construct a story about deferred maintenance and family responsibility that sounds almost reasonable until you check the property records. And I think about how that same patience, turned towards something real, might have built something worth having. But some people look at what someone else has built and see only something unclaimed. A space they could fill. A signature they could approximate. They forget that absence isn't the same as abandonment. They forget that a lake house, or a company, or a life can be deeply loved from 1,000 miles away. And they forget that the people who care most about the truth are usually the ones who made sure to document it. If you've ever been told you're being unreasonable for wanting what's already yours, if someone has ever reframed your ownership as selfishness or your absence as forfeiture, then you already understand what I'm describing. The quiet water. The copper light. The moment when a single document lands on a table and the room goes still. My grandfather was right. Most people talk right through the most important moments of their lives. I've learned to let the paper do the talking instead. Subscribe for more stories about truth, patience, and the documents people wish you'd never kept.